This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain and cryptocurrency space. Before we get started, I want to let you know that we have a sponsor. Yes, this episode is brought to you by Nexo, the only provider offering instant crypto credit lines, which let you use digital assets as collateral to get cash in more than 45 different fiat currencies and stablecoins. In order to secure a loan with Nexo, you must first deposit collateral that will be used as a security deposit to repay the loan if you fail to do so. The cryptocurrencies currently available to serve as collateral are Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, the Nexo token, Binance Coin, Stellar, and EOS. And new collateral options are being added all the time. Nexo also offers the ability to earn 8% daily compounding interest on your digital assets, euros, US dollars, and Great British pounds. Now this is up to 130x what the traditional banks offer. And what's more, interest is paid out daily and you can add or withdraw funds at any time. Nexo launched in 2018 and since then the company has established itself as the world's leading crypto lending service. So far they have processed more than 1.5 billion for more than 550,000 users on their platform. And the company has 100 million in insurance on all custodial assets provided by the leading audited custodian BitGo. So don't worry, your assets are safe when using Nexo. Get started at nexo.io. My guest today is Loong Wang. Loong is CTO and co-founder of Ren, a much-hyped DeFi protocol that enables the permissionless and private transfer of value between any blockchain. Interoperability. Welcome to the show, Loong.
Hey Andy, thanks for having me.
Are you Australian?
Yeah, I am half Australian and half Singaporean.
Excellent. Hey, well, it's good to talk to an Aussie, and as I understand it, you're in Canberra. So just before we get started, let's do a quick check-in on yourself and on your health and on things on the ground where you are in Canberra, because obviously, you know, we are in the middle of a global pandemic, COVID-19. How are things in Canberra?
Yeah, certainly strange times. So I'm actually usually in Singapore, and I came to Canberra to sort of meet up with our dev team that's here and, you know, to help with the development towards mainnet. But then COVID struck and travel restrictions were put in place. So I'm stuck here for the time being. You know, there are certainly worse places to be stuck. I think Australia is doing pretty well at the moment, especially Canberra. It's quite a small city by comparison to a lot of other places and not very dense. Certainly you can notice that things have changed here, but it's nothing drastic, and it doesn't seem to be getting in the way of the team or our morale.
I'm glad to hear that. It's probably a similar case here in New Zealand. In fact, just this morning when I woke up, you know, I hadn't seen much international coverage of the situation here in New Zealand, but that did change this morning. The Washington Post had a lead story complimenting really New Zealand's approach and how well we've done, not just to flatten the curve, but I think the Washington Post said we are squashing the curve. So, you know, fingers crossed and touch wood that continues to be the case in New Zealand and certainly Australia too.
Yeah, I think you guys are certainly doing a lot better job than some countries around the world, and you have the good leadership to back it up as well. So hopefully that continues.
Yes, indeed. Well, so what's your background then? So you grew up in Australia, and I think you have a background as a computer scientist, and you studied distributed systems. So how does a young man growing up in Canberra or Singapore and in between, how do you follow the distributed systems path?
So I followed that through a strange path, actually. I originally wanted to be a physicist, and just had this passion for wanting to know how things worked. And I guess that ended up getting attached to computers. It actually started with gaming.
Nice.
And then I wanted to, you know exactly how all of that worked. And so I ended up discovering this, thing called programming, and, pursued that with a passion, and ended up at university wanting to learn it in a more formal environment. And I was just very fortunate that my first lecturer was also a super passionate guy, and he really took me under his wing. And he and I actually began doing research into supercomputers. And so that's kind of how it all started for me, working with supercomputers and then developing my own programming languages. for these kinds of distributed systems. And then just, I fell so in love with the topic. I kept, diving further and further into it. And that's what I did my honors thesis in. And then, during that period, I also met Ty. And by the time we decided to, get going in the blockchain space, it was all just a very natural fit. And we, saw a need for Ren, and we got in there and we started building it. And I think some of my maths background also helped with the cryptography side of things. But ultimately it came down to the distributed systems and my love for it that really hooked me into the space.
What was your first intersection or interaction with blockchain, or when did you first read the Bitcoin white paper? Or it's one thing to be deep in the world of distributed systems, but were you interested in the digital money side of things, and had you been following the research in that area before the Bitcoin white paper came out?
So I hadn't been following the sort of decentralized distributed systems type of angle. I did see the white paper in 2012. A friend sort of like pointed it out to me and asked me what I thought of it, and I dug through it and dabbled in Bitcoin a little bit just to see kind of what it was about. But I do distinctly remember looking at the price back in that period and think, somewhere between like $50. When I looked at it, I was like, this is crazy. Like, that's so overpriced. And I also wasn't really interested in that sort of like cypherpunk-esque attitude that Bitcoin really had back then, when it was sort of like, down with the government and all this kind of things. And I think the more time you spend in the space, the closer you get to that kind of attitude. But back then I was, mostly interested just in the technical side. And it was quite interesting to me. From an academic perspective, it did seem incredibly wasteful to put all that mining power into something. But at the time, I don't think anyone really thought of many other ways to do it.
Sure. So I'm going to make a guess here and hazard a guess that it was Ethereum that captured your imagination early on, as opposed to Bitcoin. Would that be accurate?
Well, actually what captured my imagination early on was almost immediately this interoperability idea, which sort of lays at the foundations of Ren. So Ty had started a crypto fund and sort of brought me into the space through his interest in that. And we looked at this space and we saw all of the cool stuff that you can do is on Ethereum. And certainly that captured my attention as you predicted. But all of the liquidity and all of the financial interest really is in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so Ren came out of a real desire to bring these two things together. And in general, just this acknowledgement that the majority of crypto liquidity is not on Ethereum. But the majority of the applications are on Ethereum, and we need some way to reconcile that and bring that all together.
At a high level then, let's just try and understand what Ren is. So Ren is part of the DeFi ecosystem, but what you're really trying to do is, this idea of interoperability, which means make all the different blockchains be able to speak to each other. And part of the advantage of doing that is you can potentially unlock all the use cases and the value and the liquidity that are on the bigger chains, most specifically Bitcoin, right? Yeah,
that's right. And so that is a reasonable summary of what Ren is trying to do. So we really want to bring all the blockchains together. And there's a lot of different ways in which people have been approaching this. There's things like atomic swaps. People create their entirely new networks and try to bring everyone to that network. People define interoperability standards like you see with Cosmos or Polkadot. But Ren really takes a different approach and says, you can build your blockchain however it is that you're building it. You don't have to think about us at all. And then we'll come and we'll bring interoperability to you. So obviously when Bitcoin and Ethereum were built, there was not really any thought put into how these two things are going to communicate. In the early days, really the only ideas that anyone had around that were about either federated pegs or atomic swaps. And so RenVM aims to solve this interoperability problem in a much more general kind of way than those solutions allow. And so what it allows you to do is, in the example of Bitcoin, you can take Bitcoin, you can send it to Ethereum and treat it just like an ERC20 on Ethereum. So that does allow you to hook into the DeFi ecosystem, and you can do things like swaps with that or trades, but you can also do anything else. Like you can lend it on a lending platform, or you could use it as collateral to mint a synthetic, but you could also use it outside of the DeFi ecosystem. And, DeFi is certainly where Ethereum is seeing a lot of its traction right now. But if a new, part of ETH was to emerge that really took off, Bitcoin through RenVM would be compatible with that kind of stuff as well.
So do you see Ren as being a core component of DeFi, or do you see Ren as existing above, alongside, and part of, but outside as well, as more like part of the decentralized future internet?
I think it's more the latter. I think DeFi is certainly going to leverage RenVM very heavily in the future in order to access things like Bitcoin. We also support Zcash and Bitcoin Cash, and we'll be looking into Litecoin as well. And so, certainly DeFi will hook into that and leverage it a lot. But I think RenVM is also going to be more general than that, because it can connect all these chains together, not just Ethereum either. We can hook into Binance chain, we can hook into Polkadot, we can hook into all these other destination chains. And so I think we will carve out a space for ourselves in this sort of blockchain ecosystem and really be what brings it all together.
Can you paint me a picture of what that world starts to look like in, the near future, say, 5 years ahead or something? Because I always like to get people to describe their own personal vision of whatever it is. So in your case, not necessarily DeFi, because I think that's almost too limiting, but what does the world look like in 5 to 10 years time if Ren is able to succeed in creating this interoperable solution, and what are all the use cases, and what does it look like?
Yeah, I think 5 to 10 years, both of those look very different. I think when a new technology emerges, it's going to be very janky to kind of use, and I feel like blockchains are very janky to use, and so often we find ourselves trying to think about how we can build this technology. And so in the next 5 years, I really hope that users stop necessarily realizing what blockchain they're using, and they just do it. They have Bitcoin and they want to trade it on Kyber, and they just do it. They don't actually have to think about what blockchain am I using, what blockchain is this application using, and then how do I connect the dots. The user shouldn't even have to think about interoperability, even if it is there. They should just be able to do what they want to do and have everything else get out of the way. And then I think in 10 years, it looks even more seamless. I think today we use the internet every day without even realizing it. Like you and I having this conversation over the internet, and it doesn't even, at no point did I engage my browser, and open up a website. I just kind of clicked some links and opened some apps, and hey, now we're talking. And all my data on my phone is all synchronizing to the cloud as well. So I'm using the internet in that sense too. And I think maybe in 10 years, we'll see money infrastructure make that next step, where now that we are able to digitize it and make all of it interact with each other, and it doesn't matter what the application is, doesn't matter what the money is, doesn't matter what the blockchain is, they can all sort of interoperate smoothly and quickly. Then we enter this sort of very seamless way with which we can interact with money.
Sounds like an exciting future indeed. Now, I want to come back to that in 1 second, but one more point on interoperability, because I've seen I think on your website, some of your literature, the term generic interoperability. Is there a distinction there? What is that unique to you guys? Is that your term, and what does that mean?
There's a lot of different types of interoperability out there at the moment. So yeah. One that gets talked about a lot is atomic swaps.
That's right.
Atomic swaps are only useful if you want to swap. So if you have an asset on one chain and I have an asset on another chain and we want to trade, we can engage in an atomic swap. And there are all sorts of advantages and disadvantages in how that's going to go. But at the end of the day, that's all we can do. If we want to lend or use collateral for a synthetic or do something else, there's no hope to use atomic swaps for that. So in that sense, an atomic swap is not a very general form of interoperability. It's one very specific thing that you can do one very specific kind of application with. There's also things like these sort of payment networks where I can pay you in Bitcoin, but you'll receive maybe ETH, right? And you have these sort of networks of liquidity that enable you to pay and receive money in different ways. But again, that's a very specific use case of just what you're going to pay versus what you're going to receive on the other end. And generic interoperability is the ability to say all of these categories come under this form of interoperability. Whatever you want to do, as long as it's something that you can express as a program, you can do it using RenVM, even if it exists across multiple chains. And that's the key about generic. We don't care what application it is that you're building. We don't even care what blockchain it is that you're using. You can use RenVM for that interoperability. And that's a very powerful and more flexible sort of network.
Yeah, and look, that is a very powerful idea, really, and it is going to be crucial for teams such as yourself to really pull this off, to allow crypto to even begin to reach any kind of potential. And look, I think Vitalik, he tweeted this just the other day. He said, it's embarrassing that we still can't easily move between the two largest crypto ecosystems trustlessly, right? So he's talking about Bitcoin and Ethereum there. But what you're saying is obviously many steps on from that, where in a simple explanation, anything can interact with anything, which is the ideal situation, right?
Yeah, and to do it in a trustless way. And not just trustless, but also sort of permissionless and decentralized and all these other nice properties that you hope from a blockchain
Maintaining
system.
all of blockchain's properties. Exactly right. Exactly right. What are the core challenges that need to be solved?
So I guess it's kind of exciting because we've done it, and we're only weeks away from our mainnet right now. And so really for us, the challenges there are minimal. Some of the challenges that we encountered along the way are, just there's the core challenge of at a technical level, how do you do this? The cryptography to do this kind of exists, but it kind of doesn't. Like there's a lot of theory around how you might do this, but the theory kind of focuses on things outside the Byzantine fault-tolerant world. And so, where you're assuming that nodes can go offline at a moment's notice and that there are financial incentives at play. And so sort of reconciling all those together and say, how can we bring this cryptography concept that exists in the sort of academic world and then was designed not for the blockchain, and bring in the blockchain and sort of make them work together in a way that's sane and has minimal risk, minimal trust, and all these nice properties that we want. That was the first challenge. The second challenge was to make sure that we didn't lock anything off, that anything you wanted to do, you could do, and that the trade-offs that we were making, because there are always trade-offs, were appropriate for as many use cases as we could think of. For example, if you want to send Bitcoin to Ethereum, which is sort of like the main use case that everyone's interested in right now, there's a huge wait time. You've got to wait for the Bitcoin to confirm on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then you've got to wait for stuff to happen on the Ethereum blockchain, and this can take hours in total. So how can you design an interoperability system that doesn't stack all these waiting times? So if you have an application that runs over 3 or 4 different blockchains simultaneously, how do you avoid having to wait for 3 or 4 different blockchains worth of wait times? Because that's starting to get ridiculous. And then how do you stop needing to have 4 or 5 blockchains worth of gas tokens? Because that would be crazy for a user to try and manage all their different gas tokens just to do this interaction. And so, that was the second challenge. And the final challenge really is about, we had to innovate a lot to make this work and build a lot of things that didn't exist before. How do you audit that? And how do you make sure it's secure? And how do you make sure that you've done it right? Not only is your theory correct, but what you've built actually matches the theory perfectly. That's a challenge in and of itself. And then lastly, I think a challenge that everyone's facing right now, and we've seen sort of a little bit of attention to, is governance. Once you've got this system and you release it out into the world, how do you control it? Who controls it? And what's a safe way to do that?
And then one other challenge, I think, probably is adoption, right? And getting people to use these protocols.
Yeah, I guess that is another challenge in and of itself. Is a network is only as powerful as its users.
So you've solved this, and so when you say that your mainnet is coming soon, right? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, that's right. So we're currently in the final stages of our audit, and we've got 2 teams that have kind of taken a look at various parts of our system and sort of helping us verify its integrity. And these teams are doing an amazing job, but obviously you can't make sure it's bulletproof. There's always going to be problems. All code is technical debt, as they say. And so when we release it in a few weeks, we're going to have to release it very carefully in a way that if there are bugs in the beginning, that we can quickly and easily fix them. And then the next challenge for us is, how do we make sure that we can let go of the system and let other people control it in full, so that it is truly decentralized and permissionless. And that governance is sort of maybe the next challenge for us that's in front of us that we haven't solved yet. We haven't come to a final decision about how we want it to work.
If we try and relate this to some existing recent situations or incidents that have happened in the DeFi space. So for example, you'll remember God, it feels like so long ago, but it was February, the BLX flash loan.
Yeah, that's right. It happened in the middle of ETH Denver.
ETH Denver, yes indeed. And then a little bit more recently, just last month, but again, it seems a long time ago, the world is just accelerating and moving rapidly at the moment. But, when all global markets tanked around the 12th or 13th of March, and there was this situation with MakerDAO and Compound and things that looked a little bit liquidation scary there
Yeah.
for a little while. Yeah, I'd love just to get your commentary on those events and, where if something like Ren is able to help mitigate.
So the BZX hack is quite an interesting one. I don't think Ren can directly help what happened there, other than the fact that Ren does help bring liquidity into the ecosystem. And when you have liquidity, you can have better decentralized oracles. And taking oracles on chain was really at the heart of the BZX hack. Someone was able to manipulate the price, the place from which BZX was getting its prices. And obviously that was a sort of a flaw in the design of the BZX system, but this is a fundamentally hard problem to solve. But it does get easier as you have more liquidity, because the more liquidity you have determining prices, the harder it is to shift those prices in a malicious way. But the BZX hack also was an interesting exploration into governance, and whether or not you think one way or another about a centralization of the governance of these systems, there was a question around the transparency and whether people who were using BZX or whether BZX themselves had been, very transparent with the amount of control they had over the system and what checks and balances they did have and were able to do without, the permission of the rest of the ecosystem. More recently, this sort of like Black Thursday, I think it's getting called. This was basically about liquidation failing us, and that liquidation mechanisms, sometimes you can't avoid them. And certainly in the way that, MakerDAO is designed, the way that Compound is designed, it's very, very difficult to think about how you might alter that design without a concept of liquidations. And so for them, it's an inherent part of the system. But we saw those mechanisms failing. There was network congestion that made it very difficult for people to do these liquidations. You had huge price movements where all these assets on Ethereum are all correlated. And so, you had large quantities getting liquidated. The challenge is that there's a temptation to use these liquidation mechanisms, these same ones that failed us that day, to implement interoperability. And if you do that, you're really beginning to compound these risks. If you have a liquidation mechanism at the core of your interoperability protocol, then it's very dangerous to use those cross-chain assets, like the Bitcoin that you've brought to Ethereum, in these liquidation protocols, because you're kind of like compounding this liquidation risk. And you're kind of assuming that these markets are going to work, and we've seen that they don't sometimes. And so RenVM really helps this, because we can achieve interoperability without any liquidation mechanisms. So RenVM doesn't use liquidation anywhere. So it would have continued to function completely fine in the face of the Black Thursday tank of ETH. And the way that it could have helped, and maybe not this time around, because crypto assets are still very correlated, but in the future, I do think that assets will begin to not be so correlated. The price of Bitcoin and the price of ETH won't, always go up together and always go down together. And when that is the case, being able to have Bitcoin backing your MakerDAO vaults or using it to collateralize your Compound loans means that you have less ETH exposure, and your DeFi applications on Ethereum or wherever else they might be, they're not going to be completely vulnerable to the congestion of the ETH network or the price of ETH itself.
That's right. So by using protocols such as Ren, eventually the idea is that, DeFi doesn't necessarily have to be completely 100% dependent on the health or not of the Ethereum ecosystem, right?
That's right. And also its market cap doesn't have to be dependent on that, right? So right now, the market cap of ETH is really what's restricting the size of DeFi, because you have all this ETH collateral that's needed. But as soon as you can bring Bitcoin into the system, you can increase that market cap if you do it in the right way.
And what's your, just while we're talking about Ethereum, what's your high-level take on the Ethereum roadmap and Serenity ETH 2.0? How's that looking from your end?
I haven't looked deeply into the roadmap specifics. I do feel for the ETH core devs and sort of their representatives. Trying to put timelines on any of this would be an impossible task, realistically. And so they're just trying to give their best estimates. And I think people who aren't as technical as them, which is probably most people because they are quite clever, would have a very difficult time understanding why timelines are so difficult to give for a technical project, especially something as monolithic as a transition from ETH 1.0 to ETH 2.0. And so I think there's this kind of echo chamber that happens where these guys give estimates or predictions or their best guesses, and then that gets turned into like a hard date, and suddenly they're never delivering on time. And you see this happen in a lot of projects, but I certainly wouldn't want to have to be them trying to predict roadmaps. I wouldn't be surprised if they're wrong, but only because I don't think I've ever met a software developer or project manager who believes that you can actually predict these kinds of timelines.
Yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. Well, let's just start to finish off on Ren. Let's just maybe get another couple of examples just so, people can and really begin to wrap their heads around the opportunities and the use cases. Maybe here's a simple one. Is there a difference from let's say, a retail investor's point of view and an institutional investor or a family office or a hedge fund or something? What would be the different use cases?
So I think for these sort of more retail users, one of the really great things about RenVM is the user experience that becomes possible. And so again, we kind of come back to that thing I was talking about a little earlier, where the user doesn't really have to know that they're interacting with an interoperability layer at all. All that they see is suddenly their favorite DEX, they can now buy stuff with a Bitcoin transaction. And they literally just have to make a Bitcoin transaction. That is how the system works. There's no extra stuff that they have to do. They don't have to, wrap or unwrap tokens, or they don't have to think about gas. And so from a retail user's perspective, they can begin interacting with their DeFi protocols without, having to think about what blockchain things are on. And we're really taking that first step towards that 5 or 10-year vision that we talked about. From the bigger guys, these sort of family offices, they suddenly get to utilize their Bitcoin and these larger market cap assets in ways that they weren't previously able to do. So you could create things like trustless OTC settlement layers, where you can, not have any sort of central party that's trying to custody funds and transition them between two parties, or you can have settlement layers that don't require any middlemen for these large assets like Bitcoin, which really isn't possible right now. If you want to be making a trade between Bitcoin and Ethereum at a large scale, you still have these trusted aspects at play, and we can remove those in those circumstances.
Fantastic. Tell me about the Ren Alliance. So I understand it's a consortium, right? So just at a high level, what's the Ren Alliance and what is the vision there?
So the Ren Alliance is how we solve the other challenge that you brought up that I missed, which is adoption. How do you make sure that this network gets adoption? Because liquidity is all about adoption. So the Ren Alliance is a group of projects that are committed to helping RenVM, either by doing publicity with it or for it and get the word out and do education, or to use RenVM to bring Bitcoin or Zcash or Bitcoin Cash to their protocols, or even to directly influence its security by running dark nodes and helping the network maintain its decentralized and trustless properties in the long term. So really the Ren Alliance is about projects that want to work with RenVM and the Ren team to help make this vision that we've talked about a reality. And so at the moment we have, I think, somewhere between 40 and 50 members, and we announced the first round of them several weeks ago. So if there are any projects out there that are listening to this and you want to take advantage of interoperability, you should reach out to us and join us, and we'll be able to provide technical support and help you design the best way to leverage interoperability, but also engage in some co-marketing so that we can really get adoption for this thing going.
Amazing. Sounds great. Well, links to all of that stuff will, of course, be in the show notes. Just before we go to a quick break, and after the break, obviously, we'll come back and finish off with the Crypto Conversation hot take round. But one last thought, Loong, and look, just feel free to speculate, let your imagination run wild and free. But do you see the current COVID pandemic and the fact that everyone is locked down and the world is obviously changing, and all sorts of trends that had kind of been bubbling away in the background have been, for good or not, put on a little bit of an accelerative process? So obviously remote work and virtual worlds and anything digital has been given a little bit of a boost, it feels. How do you think this plays out? Just, I guess, relating to what we were talking about before, just looking forward 5 or 10 years. Do you think the world, we just pick up where we left off, or have things changed?
I really hope things have changed. I do. I can't say that I have an extreme amount of faith that once it's all over, it won't go back to normal. We've seen certainly a habit of normalization of things that probably shouldn't be normalized in sort of recent events. But I think, it's quite a good thing that COVID has been as chilled out as it has. And it certainly hasn't been chilled out, but it could have been so much worse. And if it had been, we would have been equally unprepared and the results would have been much more devastating. So hopefully this is kind of like a wake-up call for governments around the world to say, hey, we should be ready for this kind of stuff. Because if next time it's twice as deadly and it affects everyone equally, not just one particular group of people that might have existing respiratory issues, but affects everyone, things would have gone so much worse. So hopefully we can come out of this better prepared for the next one, because I think there's no doubt that there will be others, and we can not know when they're going to happen or how severe they're going to be. Certainly, I hope that all of my favorite restaurants continue doing delivery. That has been one thing that I have certainly noticed, to end it on something a bit more lighthearted.
Yes, I agree with that. Nicely said. Every Monday I have a mapu tofu. There's a place near the Brave New Coin office.
That's one of my favorites.
Incredible. Me too. And I'm missing my mapu tofu. It's been 3 weeks now. So hopefully all those establishments are able to get going again once the general population is released back out into the wild, as it were.
Yeah, and I think we will start seeing that happen soon, but fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed indeed. All right, well, let's go to a very quick break, and then we'll be back in 30 seconds to finish off with the Crypto Conversation Hot Take Round.
Whether you're an enterprise fund manager or a retail trader, buying and selling cryptocurrencies successfully requires price discovery you can rely on. Brave New Coin's liquid indices provide trusted US dollar prices for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ripple. Featuring end-of-day or intraday outputs, you can count on the BLX, ELX, and XRPLX for accurate US dollar pricing for smart contract oracles, settlement price discovery, net asset valuation, and performance analysis. Visit bravenewcoin.com to find out more.
Loong, I like to finish each Crypto Conversation podcast with a very quick round of rapid fire Crypto Conversation hot takes. Are you up for it?
Yeah, let's do this.
All right, I just want your hot takes, your hot fire. Take your best shot. Here we go. Where do you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-coin opportunist spectrum?
I think I'm on the multi-coin opportunist spectrum, although I do love it.
I would have been surprised if you'd said anything different. But Loong, what would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
I think no one is going to manage to uproot ETH.
Wow, interesting. I like it. Okay, I ask every guest this question, and yeah, the closer we get to it, the more contentious it possibly comes. But who do you think wins the American presidential election 2020?
Oh God.
That was a big sigh.
I am going to say Trump, but I'm not going to like that I say
Fair enough. A lot of people probably would think that. Before COVID, I used to say, this was one of my hot take questions, I would say, UBI, Universal Basic Income, as a potential fix for AI-induced automation. Is this a good idea? And I would ask this question because at the time, Andrew Yang was still, in the Democratic primary race, and he was a proponent of this idea. But now, strangely enough, UBI is kind of back at the forefront of things as a potential fix, in the short term at least, for the fact that the economy is obviously diving off a cliff, and somehow there needs to be money out to the people who are most affected. UBI, what's your take?
I think there are going to be forms of UBI that will work. I don't think I've seen one that I think would work yet. I prefer versions of it that are like negative tax for people in low income brackets. I think those are sort of more on the right idea.
Okay. Bill Gates famously said, we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. What does the blockchain space look like in 10 years' time?
I think most sound money systems will be backed by blockchains, even those that are centralized and run by governments. I think they'll all be running on blockchains because they're just a better way of managing.
I love that. Great answer. All right, well, sci-fi author William Gibson said, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Can you think of an example of the future being here right now, but most people just aren't really aware of it?
I guess crypto. I know that's a really boring answer, but so few of my friends even know what it is or how it works. But the future of money is like right in front of us right now, and we're all having a good time with it, and a lot of people don't even know what's going on.
Absolutely. Well, you need to up your game with your friends and introduce them to the wide and wonderful world of Ren.
That's right, I gotta start showing.
So maybe start them out with Bitcoin before they, just ease them down the rabbit hole. we're almost done. Let's zoom out. What is the long-term future for the human race? Do you see dystopia or utopia?
I see neither. I think dystopias aren't stable, and I don't think utopias are possible. So I think that we'll continue hammering on the way that we've been hammering on, and we might see nations collapse, and we might see international currencies change, but I don't think we'll achieve either a utopia or a dystopia.
Yeah, that's a nice way of looking at it. I like that perspective. All right, well, this has been a lot of fun. Loong, let's finish this off. What is your favorite science fiction book, film, show, or universe?
I have really enjoyed Blade Runner. I got back into it after the new one was released, and it's just awesome. It defied all my expectations.
Fantastic. Visually stunning, and just slow, patient world building and storytelling.
And it's been such a long time since we've seen such patient storytelling.
Absolutely. Hey, that is a great way to finish. Take us out, Loong. The microphone is yours. Tell the people where they can go to find you on your various platforms, and where they can go to find out all about Ren. Take it away.
Yeah, come follow my Twitter, BZLWANG, or come join our Telegram. I'm sure there'll be links for all that in the description of the podcast. But yeah, those are our two main platforms. That's where we distribute all our information: Twitter,
Boom.
Telegram.
Hey, thanks, Loong. All the best, and stay safe. Okay, there you go. That is today's episode. Thank you to Loong and thank you to Ren. As always, links are in the show notes to Loong's Twitter profile and to the Ren protocol. Shout out also to Loong for the Blade Runner reference. That, I think, is the first time we've had someone go for Blade Runner as their favorite sci-fi. Well overdue. It is a peerless classic of the genre. Thanks also to Nexo for sponsoring the show. If you want to earn interest on your crypto assets, of course you can with Nexo, and there's a link in the show notes to enable you to do. Nexo can help you do that too, and there is a link, of course, in the show notes. All right, well,